What's going on, everybody? Kasabe here with a new video series. I'm hoping to find a little bit of a niche with these videos, as this isn't your typical franchise series or MLB The Show content, really. I don't play Diamond Dynasty much, and I don't play much of Road to the Show either. A lot of what I do with franchise is actually just doing a complete retool of the franchise itself. I don't keep any real players, or prospects for that matter. What I like to typically do is start a new season with a fantasy draft, and I only select players who do not exist. They're not in any minor league system, major league team, anything like that. If you were to start a franchise and use the default rosters, anytime there's a roster update, MLB The Show randomly computer generates all of these players, and of those players, the top one is 75 overall. Every created player that is customly made is 75 overall or lower. So with my first pick in the draft, I typically find some of those players that are in the 75 overall range, hopefully with a good potential, and then from there I have to build my team using players that are 75 or lower overall. Typically, the players on my team range anywhere from the MLB roster that is from about 67 to 75 overall. Over the course of the franchise, I try and find players that I do well with. It doesn't necessarily have to be players that have good potential or overall. There are just some players that I tend to play better with, so I experiment quite a bit. But I do have a franchise like this already. I used the Chicago Cubs starting back in MLB 14 The Show, and sadly this year my franchise save file has frozen anytime I try and hit a play game. I'm hoping that gets fixed and I can maybe do a little update for both franchises in the future. But if not, I'm going with my contingency plan, which is to start a new franchise, and I feel that it would be the best way to kind of keep an audience going. It's kind of hard to dive into my Cubs franchise when I'm already 8 years in terms of seasons played. So this one will be a little bit better in terms of just kind of seeing how I start out and how fast these players can develop and how good my team can get in a short span of time. As you can see here, this is my Cubs season. I can still access everything in terms of rosters and look at players, adjust my lineups and pitching rotation, and a lot of these players are beasts. So I'm starting to get to the point in this franchise where I had a lot of 90 overalls that I had on my team, and I have to start picking which ones I want to keep, since a lot of people are reaching the service time maximum and want max contracts. So that's the neat thing about this, is everybody kind of starts off slow and you get low budget, but then you're going to get to the point where everybody costs money, and it's up to you from there to kind of develop your team while also keeping your team below the luxury tax. This year's edition of the show is a lot cooler in the fact too that you can create a team. So I've already went ahead and created a team. As you can see, I've made the Rock City Raptors. This Raptors logo is one I made for somebody a couple years ago, and I've always kept it since then. I've always enjoyed dinosaurs and like the Toronto Raptors logo, so I tweaked the colors a little bit from what that user had, developed it into my own, gave him a new stadium, kind of modeled the jerseys after the Toronto Raptors from the 90s, since I think those are some of the coolest jerseys I've ever seen. But as far as these videos go, I'm still going to hopefully make some logo speed runs. This is just gameplay, because I've been meaning to upload some gameplay for a while. In the future I might live stream a couple of the games, but for the time being I'm going to take the games and edit them into an almost like Sports Center-esque short video montage of all the biggest happenings and highlights of the game. In the future I might also add a face cam, but for the first few times I'm just going to do it with just the game footage to keep it less choppy, especially if I had a video cam, like my face would be all over the place and stuff like that. One quick note I should mention is I use Hall of Fame settings. One of the things that I do a bit differently though is I use the classic guess pitch, and my reasoning for that is when you're in the batter's box as a player, you're always trying to itch towards a certain location or pitch. That's why you see like so many people like get into fastball counts and then they guess a fastball. So if you guess correctly, you would have a little bit more of a reward by doing so. A lot of people think guess pitch is kind of cheap in that regard, and I can totally see that from an online perspective, but this is just for fun for me, and I do think that risk reward is kind of a cool thing to do, especially since guess pitch is pretty low in terms of reward anyway, so it's not like I'm getting too much. So you will see that during gameplay on occasion. I also use quick counts to make the game a bit faster, and also mainly because when I'm pitching, if I don't use quick counts, I don't throw very many walks at all, so it makes it a bit more realistic in that regard, just getting into high leverage counts, and the pressure's really on from there to me as a pitcher. So for the players that I've drafted so far in this franchise, the cream of the crop is second baseman Kenny Gann. Only 19 years old, has amazing contact so far. His fielding's going to get pretty good over the course of a few years. I was a bit surprised. Usually during these fantasy draft sessions that I do, there's a couple players that are 75 overalls. They don't tend to be an A potential. And the reason he's a 78 on the screen is because of his morale, but finding a 75 right off the bat with A potential is huge. During the few times I've done franchises like these in the past, typically you want a couple people that have A or B potential that can grow into something good. You might have a bunch of service level people with C potential that, since you play with them a good portion of the first couple seasons, and if you do well with them, they might increase their potential, making them get into the low 80s. So it really depends on how well you do with those service level people to start. Will they sink or will they swim? And then once you start doing a few seasons, the draft starts to get better. You get some prospects, or you can trade for other prospects that other teams have drafted. One thing I'm really pumped about too with Kenny Gann is that he's the top rated prospect in all of the top 50, and that includes real prospects in the MLB. So I went ahead and looked in the created player edit section, and his potential is a 97, which is crazy, especially like I said, the fact that he's 19 years old. Usually when you start franchises like this, you get service level people that are like maybe 24, 25 that are like that high overall. Potential is kind of a crapshoot, but this is crazy. I think this guy will be into the 80s or 90s by the time he's like 21 or 22. The icing on the cake is the fact that he's a switch hitter, so he can bat from both sides of the plate, and his spray chart is using the whole field. So if I'm ever late on a fastball or need to push something the other way, he can hit it that direction. Going to be a super addition to the top of the lineup. In terms of the pitching during this draft, the skill levels weren't very high, so the prospect I'm most excited about is Clyde Booker, who's a closing pitcher who throws almost 100 miles an hour. My bullpen's going to be pretty good due to the fact that because when you start a franchise session, you get a 90-man roster, and each team is required to have 3 closers by default. And a lot of major league teams only have 1, maybe 2 actual closers, people who actually pitch in the MLB on their roster. So the game has to auto-generate a lot of closers, which typically they regard higher than relief pitchers. There's a lot of closers out there that are high overalls, good potential. So one of the tricks of this draft is drafting a bunch of closers to the point where you have like 10 of them on your team, and then you switch them over to relief pitchers after the franchise is started. During the fantasy draft session too, the computer doesn't start drafting relief pitchers or closers until about round 8 or 9, and then it gets to the point where like everybody drafts those kinds of pitchers all in the same round, unless they're just so good that you can't pass them up. So I was able to get a lot of closers with decent overalls a bit later in the draft than one person might expect. This first season I'm probably going to have to rely on my starting pitchers to get me about 4 or 5, maybe 6 innings, and then just heavily rely on my bullpen for the last 3-4 innings of a game. The last prospect I'm really excited about is a third baseman by the name of Tino Melendez. Typically the game weighs overalls a bit differently from position to position, so your second basemen are going to be a lot higher than anybody else, and recently a lot more of the other infielders are rated lower, typically due to their fielding attributes. Melendez isn't great in terms of what I would expect from a corner infielder to start, but he's 18 years old, he's 73 overall, and he's got A potential. His fielding is going to get to the point where by the time it develops, you might be reaching like 70 or 80 peak. So by the time he's 22, 23, 24 years old, he'll be above serviceable in terms of fielding. Me personally, I'm really good with contact hitters who can use the whole field, so this guy's kind of like a bit of a carbon copy of Kenny Gann. The fact that his contact and vision are high, his speed is fairly decent. It's not like a burner on the base paths, but enough where he can make the stretch from like first to third on a ball to the outfield or anything like that. I typically like to stack my lineup with as many contact hitters as I can, and then try to have a few power hitters towards the 4 and 5 hole, just in case I need a big bop later in the game. I'm usually a grinder at the plate, and the fact that I use all sides of the field, I go with the pitches that are given to me, and I fight off foul pitches. With quick counts, it's a bit easier to do that, and I draw a lot of walks. It's kind of the way I operate as a player myself. I'm in a softball league co-ed team where a lot of the time I just hit singles that I might be able to stretch in the doubles. I don't try and go yard with the ball every time I hit it, and that's kind of sharpened my baseball IQ to that same standing when I'm playing MLB The Show. I try and put myself in the player's shoes and try and use the whole field based on what would best work out given the situation that's given to me. By the time this video has been uploaded, I've already played Game 1, and everything I just said was kind of a lie so far, in the fact that it was a lot higher scoring of a contest than I anticipated. So that will be the next video to come out, is a recap of Game 1, or at least the latter half of Game 1, since that's what I have the most clips of. And I hope to do that, like I said, in a sports-centered, like, highlight fashion, where I kind of show all the scoring plays and all the key moments of the game, even if it isn't every scoring play, but what I feel would best tell the narrative of the game and, you know, how the game went. If you guys would like to know about these types of franchises that are similar to this one, feel free to contact me in the comment section or on Twitter. I just love developing created players like this on MLB, Madden, whatever it is, and share those players with my friends. We kind of talk to each other about who's beasting it in what sports game, and you know, what our all-time squads would be based on what we've heard from each other. It's just really fun to do and draft players like this and develop them, and kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of being a GM in a way. Otherwise, that's going to do it for my introduction video for the Rock City Raptors franchise, and I'll be uploading more game footage here in the future, whether it's the highlight packages like I said, or maybe if it gets to the point where I get enough interest, I might do some live streaming on YouTube, in which case I'll just add those to a playlist after the fact. Thank you so much for all of your support so far, and of course, I'll continue to work on logos in the meantime. We'll see you guys in the next video. Game 1 is coming up next.